Good morning, everybody. My name is Will Schmier, and welcome back to another episode of the Lovable Survivor podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about returning to work as a stroke survivor. Hard truths, no sugarcoating it. I will tell you right out the gate, everybody wants it to go a certain way, and then there's the way it's probably going to go. This episode, I'm going to do my very best to keep a level, cool head. It has been a couple of years since I was in the workforce. I did try to go back to work full time after my stroke. And I will just tell you, it's really difficult for lots of reasons. And I think there are two sides to every story. And the one thing I will say is that everybody says it is challenging, and that is absolutely true. I think there are some key points that I will bring up throughout this episode where, yes, communication, I think, seems obvious to me, but it may not be obvious to everybody. And then there is like multiple levels of communication. There's multiple levels of planning. There is honestly, everybody's stroke is different. That is also a fact. Unfortunately, that makes it all the more difficult, both for the company that you work for currently and hopefully are still employed at. And yeah, there's just a lot to it. So we'll jump in. I think this might be 2 episodes. So we'll hit the main points today. We'll do kind of the overarching high level stuff, and we can get more specific down the road. If this episode warrants being split into 2, we can certainly do that as well. I'm happy to do follow-ups down the road as questions come in. If people have certain questions that I can lend some support to, or data I might have access to, or just, friendly advice. As always, this is kind of, I'm going to share my take, what happened for me, what I wound up doing, and just the way I went about it, and things I might do differently, and certain things that I wish I did differently. And I will say, from the get-go, I hate saying things like this is why I struggled for a long time to work with survivors, because obviously I don't think it needs to be said, but being said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an attorney. I've consulted some in the past. I have family that works in law, just like I have family that are, professional medical doctors of various kinds, people that work in the healthcare industry. I know a lot of people. I've spoken to a lot of people. I have my own team of various, lawyers and attorneys and medical professionals. So nothing I say is actually medical advice or legal advice, and you should definitely seek your own counsel when you're going through this if you run into snags. That seems really obvious to me, but it's not always obvious to everybody. And I think I will tell you, when it comes to being a stroke survivor and going back to work, there are a lot of moving parts, and I think everybody needs to consult professionals, because it is kind of a difficult process, and not every company or individual is equipped to go back to work. So again, the main point I think is that returning to work will be challenging, both for you as the stroke survivor, probably your family, probably your caretakers, and definitely for your employer. So it is going to be critical that you work together. Now, I will say, there is certainly a ton to that. If you are in a position where you're working with healthcare professionals, maybe you were at an inpatient facility, maybe you're still doing outpatient, there are lots of resources. Some are good, some are not so good. That being said, I think, the first and foremost, most important thing is you, as the individual survivor, need to take care of yourself, because if you aren't in a place that is, and you're working towards, you may have some deficits, you may still be going to therapies, So you may not be able to work full time. And I do think there is my wise, not wise, sorry. My advice to any survivor would be to have these conversations openly and honestly with your employer with some caveats. But I think you need to really take the time during your rehab and any downtime while you're recovering initially and getting to what I call kind of a stable phase where maybe you're on medications and you've gone to therapy or you're through therapy and you still have time before you need to make a decision about work. I think you need to really take the time to assess your situation, take stock of your life, where you want to go, if you're even doing something that you want to do for the rest of your life, because this is not an easy process. So you need to have some things in place, both for yourself and, well, mostly for yourself, but also for your family, because you may be in a position where you're the primary, insurance. If you have a family that relies on your insurance, there's a lot of moving parts to this. So it is going to be challenging. Like I said, no two people are going to be the same, and finding support and, accommodations. When I came out, just to give you a little context, I already worked for a company at the time of my stroke where we were fully remote, even prior to the pandemic. So that was not really an issue. There were other things that kind of became an issue, and, I'll touch on that, but I don't want to get too deep into the weeds because it's been a couple of years and there are some, I don't want to misspeak, but there's just a lot to this, and it is not as simple as just, you would hope and you would wish as a stroke survivor, you're going through a ton of stuff, right? And, some people recover rather quickly. Some people do not. It takes some people longer. It just depends on the deficits that remain post-stroke and post-rehab. And so, the first steps I really think are, again, there's the way you want this to go, and then there's the way it's really going to go. And that depends on a lot of things. So if I could do it all over again, I think I would really try to assess and be honest with myself. Am I even in a career or a place that I feel like I want to keep fighting for? At the time, it seemed okay, but I will remind everybody who may not know me personally, this was already kind of my second, almost kind of my third career, because my first career out of college was working in real estate. And I went back to architecture down in Miami, which is the original thing I majored in college. So when I became a developer, that was really because I was pivoting out of architecture after the first housing crash in 2008. And, architecture was great. So I loved it, but I just couldn't commit to it back then. I was too young. I didn't know what the future held for, people working in architecture, because the housing market crashed and nobody wanted to build homes. I was lucky to hang on to my job for quite some time back then. So I got into the web because I was really kind of interested. I knew it was up and coming. This is like 2007, 2008. That was a couple of years into Web 2.0, I would say, but it's still very early by all accounts. You think back to that and you look at some of those old Google pages. I mean, the mid, what do you call it? Like 2007, 2008 wasn't the end of the 2000s, but yeah, it was still kind of very early days of Web 2.0. I mean, the things that I use today, some didn't even exist. That was only 3 or 4 years into Gmail really exploding. YouTube was only like a year or two old back then. I mean, think about it. 2007 is when Twitter really hit the mainstream, and that the original iPhone was 2007, 2008. So that's really, that was really kind of the early days still. But that being said, all that to say, this was not my first choice necessarily. I got into the web because I was young. It seemed like a good idea. It was definitely the way things were moving. I'm not disappointed by the career that I had. Honestly, it was a great way for me in my mid 20s to pivot. There was a lot of opportunity. And if I worked hard, took some, back then I took night courses. I fell into the WordPress community pretty early on. I got lucky and I was able to turn it into a pretty good career for a long time. One that I'm quite proud of. But that being said, I loved the design part, but I was not passionate about writing code for other people 24/7. I mean, I even owned my own agency. I did some freelance on the side. Like I had a really good run there. But again, I wasn't super passionate about it. I was definitely going towards the people side of things. In fact, I had a promotion in 2020 at the agency I was at when I had my stroke. And, by all accounts, I was really going towards the people direction of the company, less on the technical coding side. It all would have played out very differently, I think, had I not had the stroke. But I would say for me, very early on, after I had my stroke, I got on short-term disability, which was an excellent way initially to cover some expenses. It was working really well. Things seemed good. I had the stroke. I left inpatient at the end of January of 2020. Still, this is pre-COVID, pre-MS. It seemed like, okay, this is not the end of the world. I'll be okay sooner than I thought. And that turned out not to be true because I then went back to the hospital thinking I had that second stroke in February of 2020 and then got diagnosed with MS. And like I said at the end of the last episode, and I got emotional in the last episode, that's like getting hit with the baseball bat, getting up and getting hit again. And that's really putting it lightly. It seriously almost broke me and it almost broke my family. And again, it was nothing I did really to bring that on. It's just a really unfortunate situation. And that's where I think things sort of took a turn, both for me mentally. I think I was communicating with my employer at the time. I think we were all remaining optimistic, but it was, that's big. And one thing I do want to mention, because I've not brought this up on this particular podcast before, but the year before my stroke in 2018, I actually lost my parents to a very sudden, very tragic, kind of weird, very strange story. My parents were retired and they were hiking as they did around the country. They often took trips around the country, around the world, and living their best life. They were retired. I have two sisters. My parents loved traveling. And they went out to Amboy Crater. You can Google my last name. You can Google my parents' names, Bill and Susan. They went out on a hike one day in Amboy, California, which is in the California high desert. There is a volcanic formation out there. It's super hot, about 160 on the ground in the summer. No idea why my parents went out there for this hike. I think because it is very deceptive, and my mom had this weird fascination with volcanoes and volcanic formations. I have no idea till this day why she was so into that. But yeah, they went out on a hike and they never came back. Essentially, we all believe it. They suffered a heat stroke. It was not the first time it had happened there on record out in Amboy, California. Long story short, the company I worked for, for 7 years. So in 2018, when I lost my parents, that was really tragic. And honestly, I had no idea how to deal with it. Did the best I could. The company I worked for was super supportive. They gave me a couple of weeks off to kind of get things in order, get things figured out. I can't thank them enough for that. But that was a really weird thing, right? And that was even before I had my stroke. But I got back to work. I, kind of sucked it up. And for lack of a better term, I just got back to work because that's what I wanted to do. And I think that's what my parents would have wanted. if anything, they would have been annoyed by them inconveniencing me in my life, as silly as that may sound. But yeah, so parents passed in 2018, end of 2019. I have a stroke. That's like strike two. February 2020. I'm already still on short-term disability, so it's not a big deal, but the MS kind of knocks me out. And by all accounts, I seem to go back to rehab and things seem to be okay. And we all agree I'm going to start up part-time. It's a couple weeks into COVID. It's April. Things are kind of quiet around everywhere. And I figure I could sit part-time at the computer and do some work. And I'd love to get back to work because truthfully, I think every stroke survivor really kind of just wants that sense of normalcy and they want to get back to work. And, I thought, okay, let's go back to work. And I think my employer at the time also agreed that, let's see how it goes. And we went from there. Now I was doing rehab, outpatient during COVID there, even in the lockdown. Very lucky that was available to me here in Florida. And so I started to work part-time. I started to get back in the flow, talk to people. Things were a little tough at the beginning, but I sort of made it work. I got very involved with talk to type on my computer. Thankfully, to working with Apple products, it's kind of built in. I got on calls, I got caught up, I got up to speed for about a month. It was pretty clear that my role, I needed to take a step back. And this was kind of where things got a little weird. And I was kind of asked to take a step back. And I also agreed that perhaps the new role I had just gotten into was more than I could handle at the time. Looking back on that, I maybe wish I didn't go take that step back so easily. However, if I'm being honest and I'm being level-headed now, a couple of years later, they didn't reduce my pay. It was the same pay, so they really were just taking a title away, which at the time, seemed correct. It seemed like somebody needed to fill in for me and take more of that full-time role. I think I could have got back into it because it really was a lot of people management, less writing code. And that's sort of where things got weird. Not initially, because I just jumped in and I started to help people start running the teams. Again, everybody's excited to see me. I was excited to see everybody. I wasn't, I kind of worked my way up 20, 30 hours a week for the next 6 months while I was still in a lot of therapies and rehabs. And, by all accounts, it was running pretty smoothly. And it wasn't really until the end of that summer where I kind of started walking for a little bit. And I got to a spot where I was doing better. We had, because of COVID, we did a company-wide retreat through Zoom, which was kind of weird, but it actually worked out. And, teams were going, things were running successfully. I was able to do a lot of work, not nearly as much coding as I would have liked to have done, but I didn't seem to need to do that at the time. And again, I thought things were going good. I think other people thought things were going good. I thought there was clear communication, as it wound up being later on. Apparently that communication wasn't really being communicated throughout. I think some assumptions made on my part, some assumptions made on other people's parts. In hindsight, I don't know. You work for a small company, you work for them for a long time. You just kind of think people have back and you think you're doing everything you can to get their back. It's not like I had only been working there for a month. I've been there for a long time and when you take the 6'8" guy, I don't care if you're a remote company or not. When you take the 6'8", 325-pound guy out of the mix, that is a big piece of the puzzle that is moving. And I'm not what you would call your normal developer. So a lot of our clients love talking to me back then because I was the voice of reason. I would also probably bend the rules and break the rules quite a bit. I've never been one to be quiet when I don't want to be, and I think that was used against me. And these are things I knew for years, and I don't want to get too deep into it. I knew how I was. I knew how they were. These are conversations you need to have with yourself when you're going back to work. As a stroke survivor, ask yourself, do you really, it's hard to be up. You want to get back to work because you want normalcy and you think you can do it and you think you've earned it and you probably have, but be wary because I think I got pushed around a little bit more than I would have liked to admit. Some things I was willing to bend on because I didn't really care to a degree. However, if the 6'8", 325-pound guy with 3 kids, parents passed away the year before, got a daughter going into college the year, in 2021. So I thought I was doing everything right. In my first couple, it should have been a red flag when I was asked to take a step back. However, looking back at that, I didn't fully see that. I saw that at the time, I saw it as kind of a helpful way for me to get back. Didn't think it would be what it became, which was eventually led to me walking away from the company that I worked for 7 years and had a goddamn stroke while I was, an employee there. I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into my career at that point, and I had made, by all accounts, I was not your traditional developer. There were people that were often, I'm not trying to blow myself up here, but like clients, when we had issues, who would they call? People would call and ask for Will. Like, where's Will? Can we get with Will? Where's Will? What happened to Will? Like, there's a reason I was moving up, and there's a reason why people requested, we want to work with Will. I mean, I won't say what the companies were, but there were more than one companies that we worked with at the agency level where I specifically was requested because people enjoyed working with me. I could tell you that the teams enjoyed working with me, which is why I was made the engineering manager in 2019, because I had become a leader there. I was a big presence, both physically and online. When somebody had a question, I was the person to go to. When somebody came on board and was a new person, who do they go to? Ask Will, talk to Will. This is not me saying this. This is actually, and I would say you could take this to the bank. Because here's the deal. Things got weird in 2021. Enough was enough. I had decided that I was fighting for my life and I was making changes that, I don't expect companies to change overnight, but I was making changes and things were getting weird. And I just when you have a stroke, you have a different outlook on life, and it's fine. I understand people aren't going to see eye to eye and people aren't going to agree with what I necessarily think. But I was doing a lot of bending and pushing, and I was doing a lot of work to continue to get back to work, to make other people a shit ton of money. I think at the end of the day, it speaks, I don't have to say anything else, because I walked away in May of 2021 and I had a daughter going to college that fall, and I walked away from that job, and I had no health insurance. I had a stroke in 2020, or 2019, and started 2020. I had diagnosed with MS. Me walking away, I think, showed a lot of people, and you could see it. I mean, the people that worked there when I was there, 90% of them no longer work for that company. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about how it can go sometimes. And I'm not saying I'm not to blame. I'm not saying that anybody's to blame. It certainly is not what companies are used to. Because let's be honest, the average age of a stroke survivor is 65 years old. 65-year-olds are rarely still working, 65, majority of 65-year-olds are retired, working part-time, or no longer working whatsoever. So I understand companies aren't necessarily prepared for this. That's okay. But when I think I'm communicating with people, and there is communication happening, and then like at some point, it can't all be on me. I understand as a stroke survivor, it is my duty and my job. It took me a while to wrap my head around this. I have to be open and honest about where I'm at with my abilities. I have to communicate that to people so that they're aware, because I might need accommodations. I might need to shift some things around. We might need to try to see if we can work a different way. There is a lot of give and take in this process, and employers are under some obligation to make a reasonable effort. However, none of that was ever discussed. I didn't realize that really until later, because I didn't think I needed it, and nobody told me I should go asking for it. That's not necessarily anybody's fault, but that is kind of problematic. And if I'm telling you, if I am 6'8" and 325 pounds, I don't care if we're working online or in person. If I'm getting railroaded, that means every motherfucker out here is probably getting railroaded. And that's not necessarily true, but I certainly believe if I'm having a tough time, other people, other stroke survivors are having a tough time. And that's, that is an education thing. I will say one of the disappointing things to me was that one of the owners of the company was formerly a nurse. Apparently, allegedly, I don't actually know that. I'm sure she was. I mean, why would she make that up? However, you can't be a nurse in the last 100 years and not have seen a stroke survivor or know what they go through and have some sort of idea. Here's the other thing. I didn't have all the answers. They know my parents have passed away. They know at best, I have support of my wife, who they know is deaf. They are aware I have 3 kids. They at least know of one of my sisters, because one of my sisters was helping me communicate at the points. Never did anybody come talk to me and approach me about really anything. Nobody even asked me how I was doing. The 2 owners of this company, one is a former fucking head of a department of nurses at some hospital or some floor. She's a nurse manager for years and then opens up an agency. The other person was a Marine. I mean, what happened to where's that? I'm working like I'm in the military, giving everything I got. And to be honest, it was really disappointing. It was really disheartening. I mean, I at the end of the day, I walked away. I didn't give a shit, and I really didn't want to take this path because I wanted to be polite. I wanted to be nice. And I'm sure they see it differently. They're entitled to their opinion. I think people really write people off when something like this happens. Yeah, nobody's expecting this. I will say not many people know how to deal with this. And then again, that's not necessarily on them, but I'm working to educate myself and change myself. And I'm the one finding out information. And I just felt like I was putting a lot of effort in and I was getting nothing back really at the end of the day. And I think, I just walked away because I wanted to wash my hands of it. I was sick of it. I wanted nothing to do with it. I let them off the hook. I honestly, I did consult people. And at the end of the day, I just said, you know what? When I left, I did not care anymore. I did not need them. I did not need that job. I certainly wasn't going to take it for that. Like what I had been through, believe me, I was being underpaid in the industry. Everybody who's left there since will tell you that. It is a well-known fact. There's tons of data to back that up. It's sad, honestly, because I would have done a lot for them. And I did for a long time. The fact that I lost my parents in June of 2020 and took 2 weeks off to figure that out because it was fucking weird, let's be honest. Then I returned to work as if nothing happened. It's crazy. So just be careful when you're returning back to work. I think we'll do another episode where I'm a little bit more succinct here, but I think, returning to work is going to be difficult. If I face challenges, I can only imagine what other people are facing. And I was in a spot where I was able to walk away and I just kind of washed my hands of it. Like I said, I think that me walking away was the tip of the iceberg, because I think you saw like 20, 30 people over the course of that following year walk away. Some, I think, were let go, but many walked away and went elsewhere. And, they'll tell you a different story, because I've heard the stories they told people. And it was, I just decided one day I went in, I talked to somebody in HR and I said, I'm done. This is no longer for me. The sad thing is, here I am in 2022. I am probably in the best shape I've ever been in, to be quite frank. I'm not typing 90 words a minute, but I guarantee you I have a lot to offer. It's fine, because I've got my time back. I've got my businesses. I'm able to lead the life that I want to lead. And I'm not making other people money. And, I hope they're doing well. And I was quiet about this for a long time, because a lot of people still work there that I really liked. And, some remain good friends. And so I think, to the employers out there, I encourage you to really just make an effort. If one of your employees has a stroke and you don't have things in place, take the time to talk to that individual. I think you got 10 minutes for an employee of a couple of years, even if somebody's an employee for a week or a year, and something like this happens, they can get on the phone with them, talk to them, they can see how you can help, because it's weird. There are a lot of details there I've left out for various reasons that, might tell a little bit of a different story, but I think I've summed up what can happen. And I think employers should learn, because I think some people are not necessarily, able or going to walk away the way I did. Some people are going to fight. And it seems like a needless situation to be in for anybody, because here's the thing. I did walk away and I didn't make a big stink about things, because I knew other people were also dependent on that job and that company. And for me, just like when people ask me why I didn't do something when I had my stroke in the hospital, it's nobody's fault at the hospital that I had the stroke in the hospital. Yeah. Do I wish somebody caught it? Sure. But it also was like the 2 days before Christmas. It was the day before Christmas Eve on a Sunday. Like, the doctor watching the floor is just like there to make sure, that things like that probably don't happen. But he's, the doctor that was on the floor, the main doctor at the time, kind of like just there as a body during the holidays, was not qualified to determine whether or not I had a stroke. That's unfortunate. And I'm okay with it, because I'll be better for it in the long run. I mean, yeah. When I think about it, yes, of course, I'd rather have less deficits, but I don't think anything could change. No, there's no reason to be hurting other people. That might, the resources for the hospital are not something I'm looking to take. There's a whole thing about medical stuff, but like other people need those resources. The hospital needs those resources, so they can pay their employees, And I'm so grateful and glad I didn't have to go that route. But to my fellow survivors and caretakers and family, just know that, and employers, I think, can benefit from hiring, disabled or handicapped people. I use those words because I don't mind them. A stroke is a disability. It's a brain injury. I do have moments, but yeah, we're on year 3 and I'm getting a lot better. And, I don't know, just don't write people off, because it might take some time and it may never go back to the way it was. And, I think it'll work itself out, kind of like it did for me, where I just washed my hands of it and said, fuck this shit, I'm out. Again, not everybody is like me, but I encourage you not to write people off and just keep communication and planning open and available and try hard to work with the individual who's suffered a major life event. I mean, I think this is a clear example of companies that treat people like resources and, yes, yeah, get rid of me or I'll get rid of myself. But like, I don't know. I don't see how that works out well in the long term for the company or the brand. I hope it does work out because I know they still employ people. So I think to that end, I do want to say maybe they learned their lesson. Maybe I was, some help into opening eyes. Maybe I wasn't. I'm not going to say you shouldn't work there or shouldn't be a part of that team. There's no reason for that. I'm just saying I no longer, in my heart of hearts, it just wasn't for me anymore. I loved everything about being a developer, but at the end of the day, I don't really care about agency work. Like I worked with really cool brands, but I think about all the pain points I had over the years. When we get into squabbles with clients about certain things, it's like, does that really matter in the grand scheme of things? And I think you have to ask yourself, does it to you? I mean, if it does, keep at it, keep going, keep fighting. But if you get to a point where you can't, think about ways to get out and what you can do in the future. Because I guarantee you have a lot of valuable resources. If you have the stroke and you're able to overcome it, yeah, it might take some time, but I can't explain it. There's nothing like this. So if you're able to fight back and come back from a stroke, it may take a while. You may be slower. That might be frustrating for years. It may never change, but like, as long as you're alive, as long as you're still breathing, this sounds corny as shit. You still have a ton of value to provide for the world. It's different, unique skills and perspective now than it might have been before. But I guarantee you'll find it. It'll be worth, just taking care of yourself and doing the best thing you can do for yourself, because that's just going to allow you to live a successful and fulfilled life at the end of the day. And a job is important, but don't tie your entire worth to the job. And if you feel like you're trying to make it back and you're not making progress, just have those conversations, because if you don't have them, it's just going to keep getting worse. You're going to be in not such a great spot. And you're going to do something like I did, where I just walked away after almost 8 years. Like it's, I didn't give 2 weeks notice and do anything. I literally just walked in and said, fuck this shit, I'm out. And that was the end. So don't be like me. But to that point, again, Survivor Science, the community is being built as we speak. I'm kind of doing the early groundwork there. You could sign up for the community and get on the list for when we are ready to launch. You can go to vip.strokesurvivor.com, or I'm sorry, vip.survivorscience.com is where you can sign up for the list for Survivor Science, the community I'm building with friends for things exactly like this, for support groups, for learning new skills. It's really a place for survivors who are looking to get back to it, get back on top of their game. I think we all know as survivors, things are different for us, and finding that kind of common ground and, sharing information, what's working for you, what's working for somebody else. Like, let's learn from each other. And then I did launch the new website for the podcast, which is podcast.lovablesurvivor.com. And there you can check out other episodes of this podcast. Definitely check out the previous episode from last week where I was pretty emotional, although I got pretty emotional today, about just how difficult overcoming a stroke can be. The last 10 minutes, I re-listened to the podcast myself a couple times, and the last 10 minutes is, it's hard for me to even listen to, but it's, I don't know, I'm not gonna say my own podcast is gripping, but it is definitely emotional, and I think a lot of people resonate with it, especially if you've been through this. And let's see, I think that is it on the happenings. When you do go to the podcast website now, podcast.lovablesurvivor.com, it's in the show notes. You can sign up for the newsletter that is going to be kind of things that I missed from the podcast or things that I will bring up later on future episodes that I should have brought up during the episode. Things like that, a little behind the scenes. I'm really trying to start the newsletter and get some traction there. I've avoided newsletters for a really long time. I think they are worth it. I've certainly read some that are much better than the newsletters of the early 2000s and 2010s. Yeah, so newsletters available coming soon. And then, if you go to vip.survivorscience.com, that's simply just sign up to let you know when I launch the community, because early participants will definitely see the benefits of joining early, like most communities. So, that's it for this episode. And I think we'll probably talk about going back into the workforce. I definitely have some friends who work in different areas, and I think it's kind of an ongoing conversation because not everybody's going to have the experience I had. Plenty of good companies out there, including the one I used to work for. They're not a bad company. It's just things got weird. Very particular to my story and my circumstances. I don't think it goes that way for everybody, but I will say it's really, really hard. So keep at it, keep strong, stay strong, and bye.